2 minutes. Good evening, good evening, good evening. My name is Urban Conservative, and tonight I'm bringing something special to you. I brought on Corel Rites,
Okay.
and I'm gonna let Corel speak and introduce themselves. So I'm gonna let you speak, Corel.
Hi, my name is Coral Wrights. I'm coming out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I don't know how to introduce myself, um, but I did just release an album called Something Softer Than Saturn, produced by Circumstantial Saint, and I am really happy to be here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And before we get into that, I do have something off your new album, but I wanted to ask a question first. And is what first drew you to spoken word poetry as a medium for expression, and how has that journey shaped your artistic voice?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I've been writing poetry since I was very young, but spoken word didn't come uh, pers- uh, into my world until the spring of 2023. It was a couple months after my mom died suddenly, and I needed a space to express myself and, not have people run away from my intensity that I was feeling at the time. And so, spur of the moment, I decided to sign up for a slam poetry competition, even though I had never memorized or performed a poetry out loud before. So that was a bold choice, but it was great because people literally signed up to listen to me be intense and emotional, and instead of running away, they actually celebrated it. So that was kind of the journey for me to realize that even beyond writing poetry, being able to speak it out loud and connect with people about it, um, it's just really not only shifted my artistry but also my life and my community in general. So it's been a pretty awesome couple of years.
Uh, and that's good, and we have so much more to look forward to it. And first, I want to get into. It's not really. I won't. It's a single off your debut album, and it's called "Crybaby," and it's featuring Circumstantial Saint. Is there anything that you want to say before we get into that?
I really love this piece because it is an invitation for anyone to reflect on their own relationship with crying. And for a lot of people, so I'm told, crying is an unpleasant thing. So anything that I can do to maybe open people's idea of how crying can actually um, be a release, be medicine, I think is kind of where this piece came from, of just exploring my own relationship with crying and how growing up I was always called a crybaby. And it's sort of a reclamation of no, being able to express your emotions and be fluid in your emotion is actually a good thing. And I'm not going to let anybody tell me that being a crybaby is a bad thing.
And that's right. We all deserve the right to cry and to get to know ourselves as well. And so I want to get into Crybaby featuring Circumstantial Saint by Corel Rites. And here we go with Crybaby.
Most people who see me out in the world see me as stoic, as professional. They see me as all the ways I've been trained to be in order to survive, to be successful. But the truth is, I am a crybaby. I cry at everything. I cry for myself. I cry for others. I cry because the tree outside my bedroom window is just so friggin' beautiful. I cry because my body is tight and I don't know why. I cry because I'm a sponge that I have forgotten to wring out for far too long. And so when I do, it's a deluge of all the shit I don't need. Also a flood of the reminders of the things that I want. I cry because I interrupted that person one time, which I felt bad about for 3 weeks and still kind of think about sometimes. I cry because of seeing my brother for the first time in 3 years clean out our dead mom's house and immediately having to send him back to California. I cry. I cry. I cry. I cry. I cry because otherwise the grief would destroy me. I cry because my brother's daughter so desperately wanted to express herself but felt too safe. I cry because I couldn't give her that safe space. I cry because these are words I will never get to hear. I cry because of my friend slipping into a coma as his GoFundMe collected funds because medical debt kills. I cry because he died the morning of the night of the open mic to raise funds for his care, but instead it went to his funeral because he's dead. He's dead. I cry because our healthcare system is fucked. I cry because he lived. I cry because our paths crossed and I am better for it. I cry because a different friend stopped drying flowers to make potpourri because too many women made fun of him for creating such beauty in his life. I cry because we need more men who want to bring beauty into this world. I cry.
I cry.
I cry.
I cry.
I cry. 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 I cry because my friend confided about the abuse she experienced. I cry because of her starting to cry because it had been so long since someone cried with her. I cry because we all deserve someone to cry with us. I cry because I feel like the stream that flows gurgling behind my house, the stream where I laid to rest that starling that killed itself in my attic out of stress. I cry like that stream washing away all that needs to be acknowledged, but does not need to be held on to. I cry like that stream so I can keep flowing. I cry because I do take things personally. Shouldn't we all take things a little bit more personally? That tree blooming outside my window reminds me what life can be like when it's uninterrupted, when there are no barriers to flourishing, when our very existence is beauty. I cry, 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 cry. I cry, I cry, I cry, cry, I cry, cry, I cry, I cry, I cry.
I cry. I cry. I cry. gratitude and everyone couldn't understand. So I cried more because they couldn't understand. I always used to cry so much for everything, so everyone called me crybaby. Cause I cried because so much seemed too much. So I cried for others. I cried because at the time I couldn't be an advocate for myself, and I cried from frustration. I cried because I wasn't heard. I cried because I thought I wasn't strong. I cried because I knew what it felt like to feel everything and nothing and still be alone. At some point I came to learn that those tears shed are badges earned from shedding stones too heavy to carry. Prevent the neglect and disrespect I married. I learned to make lemons from water, and those tears watered flowers, and I poured it all over me like a shower. Those tears turned to towers, beacons of light honing my power. And now I cry for my saint, for everyone I cry, for humanity I cry, cause one saint can't show me anything humanity already has. Crying not because you have to, crying to stop the flooding. Healthy cries, cheering cries, cries of gratitude fill my eyes, swelling with joy, overflowing with more emotions that I used to be able to handle in a month and one moment. I now cry cause love takes me over. I won't cry when I know that it's over. I live now in stride, existing outside the bounds of time, floating in space, rising with grace. Future is now. I cry from frustration sometimes, but I still have hope that someday all who want to rise will shed healthy tears from their eyes. So I cry.
I was muted, but that was Crybaby featuring Curl Rites and Circumstantial Saint. And I got to give it up because I love that song so much. And it really honestly brings out the feeling that a lot of people are scared to look at the inside themselves and be who you are. That's one thing for me. So I want to give it up. Thank you so much. And honestly, I loved it, Crybaby.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the you had said about it really bringing out the emotion, and I think that's one of the things that worked really well in terms of the collaboration between lyrics and the music that Circumstantial State created, because the beat really sort of just has like this vibrational impact of just like shakes the emotion out of you, which I think really supports the lyrics. So thank you.
And I got some questions too. So your work deeply explores emotional and systemic processing. How have your themes and style evolved over time, and what continues to challenge or inspire you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting journey because I think when I first started writing poetry, like, it was very self-indulgent and just like really focused on myself. But as I started to explore the spoken word side of things, being able to speak it out loud, I have to think like, why am I bothering to say this out loud? Like, writing poetry is for me, but speaking it out loud, there has to be something for other people there. Um, so over time, it's really taking responsibility of when I say words out loud, I want to be intentional about what I'm creating in the world. And so the more I learn about my own context in the world, the more I'm able to um, speak to things outside of myself, but then also invite people into their own emotional processing so that we can all show up on the outside of things, outside of ourselves, in the best ways possible. Because even if everyone's healthy internally, if they don't know how to face it outward and show up in the same ways and work together, then literally all that inner work doesn't mean anything. It doesn't move us forward. So I guess I'm kind of growing into the idea of how to connect emotional processing to systemic reimagining, rebuilding, and get us all kind of on the same path, even if we're in the same direction, even if we're not exactly on the same path.
Right. No, and I agree so much. So, when crafting a poem, do you follow a structured process from inspiration to revision, or is it more intuitive or organic?
The answer is yes. It really changes depending on the poem and what the poem is asking for. So I think a lot of poems tend to be intuitive, and it starts with me processing something emotionally, and then by the end of the poem, I realize like kind of what the point is of why, like where the transformation is to be had. But sometimes it's way more structured. Sometimes it's like, I got a rhyme scheme I want to play with, or I have alliterations that I want to explore, or sometimes I just hear a phrase that I really like the way that it feels, and then create a poem around it. So it really depends on the poem itself and what it's calling for.
I know for me, and maybe even for like the people that are around you, but I know when I'm like doing a poem, I've studied like the last couple years about different type of poems when it came to like narrative, and I've come to knowing how to properly. I might not always be able to pronounce the words that I use, but I can at least structure it. And I'm getting way because that's one thing I never learned in school was to really more be, and I'm still kind of sloppy with it or whatever, but more about phrasing and structuring and and organizing my words and sentences.
Mhm.
So it's like poem is poetry. I shouldn't say poem, but poetry has really put me into like being able to meditate and seeing the world in a different another way than I really couldn't. I can't live it. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's not a. I don't know. That's not a good word to say, but you know what I mean. Like it's a little bit different, and it's you can express yourself in so many different avenues of words. And that's what brings it the best of it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, no, I think the one of the things that I love most about poetry is that you can express so much in so few words, and it really gives the space to encapsulate like the expansiveness of how any one feeling or experience feels. Whereas like if you were writing a novel about it, it would take much longer because you can't have the double triple meanings, you can't have the layering of a feeling in it as much. It's a lot easier to express complicated feelings and experiences. So I can kind of understand what you're saying from that perspective.
So the next question I have is, what literary devices or techniques do you find most powerful in your poetry, and how do they help convey your message?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because it's like I actually have a degree in English education, and sometimes people say, "Oh, like, hey, you did this thing. That's really cool." And I was like, "I did what? What is it called?" So I think a lot of times it's like just intuitive and it comes out that way, and maybe it's because I studied it and forgot about it, and it's back there working in the background. But I do think that probably metaphor is my strongest thing that really seems to resonate with people. But then I also think there's a directness in metaphor, which maybe doesn't make sense to most people. But sometimes our conscious brain can't really understand something, and it needs something like parallel, but not exactly, to speak to the same concept. So it's just, it kind of bypasses the conscious brain a little bit more for people, which can be a powerful tool, which is probably why Crybaby works because, you know,
You
it
know,
bypasses your defenses.
and it does, and that's the greatest part about like poetry is one thing that I've learned is like I can sit here and write out. I most of the time I'm just writing and they're like venting sessions and it's like experiences that I've either experienced or that I've seen with my own eyes and it's like writing. I shouldn't even say writing, but it's like drawing. It's like coloring. You know what I'm saying? You're like putting these words down and making something from nothing into something. And that's like, I mean, I have like notebooks just full of words and like, you know what I'm saying? It's like
Hmm.
it's fun because you can sit here and put different situations um and experiences all into one. And that's what honestly, like, I feel like all of this has the last couple years has been, and even going to, speaking to different poets and listening and just understanding is that everybody has a story. And we all have shoes. And if we can put ourselves in those shoes, we can all definitely get along better. Um, so that's one thing. But one thing I want to ask is your poetry takes many forms. How do you decide whether a piece should be a free verse, a structured form, or even transformed into a spoken word performance?
Again, that's an interesting question. I think it really depends on the message that's trying to be conveyed. Because if I am expressing something that is, initiating freedom, then it's probably going to be free verse. But things like rhyming, I tend to use when I really want people to pay attention and understand that these things are connected, right? So if it's just like a story, right, it might just be free form. But then if there's moments that I want people to connect, I'll rhyme it so that even like just subconsciously people are already connecting those thoughts together. Um, and then, there's always going to be storytelling in what I do because I don't know how to write poetry without stories. But sometimes the stories need more freedom, more flexibility, more directness. And so then I'll tend to be less focused on a structure. But when I want something to grab people's attention the whole way through and not necessarily worry about highs and lows, then I will probably do something more rhythmic and more, having the same amount of syllables, that kind of thing, to keep a consistency. But that's usually more focused concepts as opposed to like larger scale things.
Well, that's a great answer. So I guess it's really all great because at the end of the day, we're all different and we all have different processes. Um, I know sometimes with mine, I can be really fast with it, and then other times I can be really slow, and especially when they're real personal, when they mean something to me. It's like I hear different people like critique me, and that's one thing I want to talk about too is like critiquing when you perform or other people hear your poetry. Do you sometimes have people come up to you and are maybe like critiquing, be like, "Well, you should have added this, you should have added that," and you'll be like, "Wait, but it's my story. It's like it's not yours. It's mine." You know what I'm saying? Like,
So first, I'll say that people don't give me critiques nearly enough. People just tend to. Maybe it's because my pieces are so emotional; they just tend to come to me with their emotional stuff, which I love actually, because that's why I do it, to help people access their own emotions, and otherwise I wouldn't put it out into the world. But as far as like critiquing, when people do offer me critiques, I'm blessed to be surrounded by people who aren't giving me critiques because like they're trying to, tell me that I'm bad. They're giving me critiques in a way that says, I think that this is missing. And it's a lot easier to handle critiques when somebody's saying this is missing and this is what could really just like it's good. This is how it could go to the next level. Um, and with any feedback, I'm always going to decide what actually resonates with me. Even if they say it in like a mean way, I'm still able to hear what they're saying and decide what the truth is in it, and if I want to incorporate it into any sort of, uh, corrections, I guess I'll say, for lack of a better word.
I like that. I like that. My next question is: you pull inspiration from such a wide range of sources, from personal experiences to composting worms. How do these influences shape your creative process, and how do you navigate writer's block?
So I'm going to answer that in reverse. For me, writer's block doesn't exist because I don't try to force things. I go out into the world and experience things. That is how I get my inspiration. And when I don't feel creative, it's probably because I'm not doing anything different. It's probably because I'm not, interacting with any people or animals or plants or nature or um, basically what I'm saying is that my inspiration comes outside of myself, and then I turn it around and reflect inward on that experience. So whether it's composting worms, shout out to the Squirm Squad at home, but they like whether it's composting worms, whether it's the community of people around me, whether it's the stray cats in my neighborhood, everything is connected in some way. So for me, poetry is a way of finding where the connections are. So I just have to live, and then I'm no writer's block here.
Right. No, and that's a great answer. And really helps others see, um, differently how everybody's processes are differently. You know what I'm saying? Because I know I myself I have writer's block. I can admit it, and that's maybe because I go off other people's emotions. I don't really. I've gotten to the fact of like not caring about so much what other people think, because everybody has an opinion. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you take what you need and then leave the rest. Um,
Hmm.
so that's really what I've gotten to. But I wanted to. Um, we're at the halfway point, and I wanted you to give a live performance. I know you do have something written up, and we talked about this earlier, and I still believe you want to do GDP from the new that's coming out from Circumstantial Saint, the Black
Hmm.
History Month Volume 3. Is it Volume 3 or is it Volume 4? I forget.
No, it's volume 3.
It is Volume 3. Okay, okay. So I do want to do that. So I'm going to give you time. You tell me what you need, and um,
I'm ready to go.
well, you can go ahead and you can do your thing. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm.
So with that,
I'm here. I'm here. All right. Whew. Live performance. Okay, I can do this. So yeah, this is called GDP. All things are duality, a complexity of nature balanced in both nuance and grandeur. All things decompose to be reborn, continuing the greater cycles. Well, except for maybe a McDonald's filet-o-fish, which is immortal. The elixir of life, emperors drinking mercury, nobles drinking gold, Gilgamesh and now the valley. What do you hope to find in this consumption? Happiness? But what the fuck is happiness? Happy is just a happy meal sold to you by a creepy clown to encourage mass consumption to elicit mass production. What the fuck is the GDP? Gross domestic product? According to the numbers, the government doesn't distinguish between the increase in home remodels due to extra cash flow and the necessary reconstruction due to hurricane damage. Gross is right. I'm supposed to be happy, you say? What the fuck is happiness anyway? I know joy, excitement, contentment, and comfort. I know raging anger that only covers up the gaping wound of grief and hopelessness. What the fuck is happiness? The 13th Amendment supposedly does away with slavery without issue, but okays forced labor by way of prisons, slavery Mach 2. Or is it 3? So much for being free. The same plantation dirt now tilled by the same bodies from which blood once spilt or continues to spill. So much for free will. So tell me, how does that tomato taste? What taste does it put in your mouth? Does it taste like happiness to you, or is it the flavor of the karmic dollar menu? Does happiness taste like a plastic hunk of junk served with genetically identical potatoes? Don't forget your bloody tomatoes, and fish even the maggots won't touch. What is happiness? It's a lie we're told to chase to somehow feel okay, a crucial affectation when really it's just an excuse to increase GDP. The gross, destructive profanation. But all things are duality, a complexity of nature, balanced in both nuance and grandeur. Holding complexity is walking through my city, reimagining the food system, how to grow the food that helps people grow, their minds flexible, their bodies sturdy, while being grounded in the reality that sometimes the most nutritious element of someone's diet are the beans in a Taco Bell burrito and having no judgment towards that. But nuance is more than a binary. It's also holding food in my own hands, shoving it in my face like I'm in a growth spurt, with my cheesy gordita shame dripping down the front of my shirt. Poem.
ooh wee, that was deep. That was deep. That was deep. That was deep. And I don't know how to do this. I'm gonna get this. There we go. There we go. There we go. But that was deep. So that was a live performance. That was GDP by Corel Rites. And I want to get into another one of your of the album. And this is Back Then. Um, so if you anything that you can say before we get into Back Then, and we'll get right into that.
I, first of all, love this track because it started as a slam poetry competition. The theme was back then, and so I just went with it. I can spit it in 3 minutes. from memory. And also I love this track because Circumstantial State did his thing on it. There's 3 very different styles of music all shoved together. My favorite being the Brazilian funk. Excellent. And it takes heavy topics and I don't know, makes you want to dance and hopefully gives people a little hope at the end.
Well, that being said, here is Back Then, and we'll be quiet.
I was 10 when my father sat me down, took a deep breath and hesitated. He etched a judgment onto my heart as heavy as his sigh when he told me that my cousin was... Yeah, no, we're just not gonna do that. A lesbian. A lesbian. I learned what the word meant from a man in camo pants who thought Ann Coulter was bright. Lesbian meant shame and fear and something not quite right. I was 11 when my father took that same labored breath and told me that my cousin had... Yeah, no, we're just not gonna do that. Attempted suicide. I thought she had tried to kill someone else. I learned the difference between the words homicide and suicide from a man who never cried. The summer before I turned 14, my friend Amy came back from gymnastics camp. And my second thought was, she must have finally hit puberty. My first thought got stuck in my throat for the next 14 years. 21 years old, forcing myself to drink. What was I trying to forget? Maybe my uncle's voices making fun of the butch lesbians, the sissy gays, making fun of anything that threatened their own stunted life experiences and ways. So what I do, settled, moved in, got my first taste of what was supposed to be love from a guy who could only go down on me if he was 15 minutes away from vomiting up Tanqueray when I was 10. Back then, when I was 10. Back when I was 10. I have to stop there because I could keep going, but because the rhyme is so contagious. At 27, I could admit that my first thoughts back then when I was 13 was damn, Amy got hot. I kinda knew it, but it had been lodged in my throat for so long it started to taste like Tanqueray, vomits, poison, danger. At 29, I learned what internalized homophobia was from a grandma who, holding her lover's hand, could see right through. At the Dyke March in moral support of my friend, that grandma winked at me, and I thought, oh shit, she knows. Knows what? Amy got hot. Amy got hot. Back then when I was 10. Back then when I was 10. Back 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 when I was 10. Oh shit. At 31, I could finally admit to myself that I had been relieved back then when I found out my cousin had tried to kill herself and not someone else. The relief came from the assumption that it was normal to kill a part of yourself. She just tried to kill a larger part than I did back then when I was 10. But at 32, I finally pruned the branches of my family tree so that I could be free. With new branches growing, bursting with blooms, that was when my cousin taught me the word pansexual meant the freedom to connect with whomever. Focusing on the important parts, people's hearts, I learned how to be me. Back then, when I was 10, I would have never been able to believe what I know now at 36. Eyes on you, transfixed, the grimace and pain on their face isn't facing you, they're not facing themselves, living fractured and bitter, trying to swallow down the regrets, instead vomiting up their poison, where repression tastes sour, but we don't drink Tanqueray anymore. We blossom into flowers and touch hearts and some other parts. But the important part is that it really does get better.
Hey. So that was back then. And I just gotta say, I listened to your whole album, and the emotion and personal experience are deeply woven into your work. Um, how do you balance self-expression with making space for the audience's own interpretations and reflecting?
I think the way that I can do that lyrically is by just telling my story and not trying to dictate how the audience relates to it. Because, like, for example, back then is very clearly about my experience growing up queer. Um, but there are still parts about that song that people who are not queer can still relate to, because it's not about being queer, it's about being centered in our own identity and not letting the people around us tell us that we're wrong in terms of, you know, who we are at our core. Um, so I think for me, like, lyrically, the trick is just making sure that there is space for people to connect on more basic emotions and not push the definitions and the specifics so far in their face. And then I think musically, actually giving space between points so that you're not just like overwhelmed by a bunch of stuff, but actually giving people space to like feel in that moment, so that they don't forget what they're trying to, well, like what the whole thing is about, if that makes sense.
No, and it does. And I mean, we all have our own ways of explaining things. And I think that the way that you explain things through your music is phenomenal. You know, that's one thing that I can say is that circumstantial. I'm gonna call him that because you know we all know him as you know John Tell, but as because he's been my producer the whole you know my whole time. You know we just came out with my new album this month. You also came out with your new album,
Yes.
and
Great
right,
album, by
you
the
know,
way.
thank you, thank you, thank you, and yours is phenomenal. To see the work is and to truly understand because the more I know, I didn't know a lot of uh about you before you know we started doing you know poetry and I've done my own digging. You know, I haven't asked anybody about you. I've done my own work. You know what I'm saying? So just seeing the journey that you have done because you went from corporate to not only just the corporate world but also the urban world of and I call it the urban world because it's a world of where people can't really understand it, but it's there. You know what I mean? And that's there's such a line between being corporate and then being of who you are because when you're corporate you're representing a company, you're representing a business, uh and when you're yourself, you're just representing you. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I guess it's called code switching. I guess that's what they call it or whatever. But um, it can
I think the cool part about my long, extensive career in corporate environments working is that it gives me a very deep insight into how most Americans are living. And it's through that that I'm able to go, okay, I hear you and I see what you're doing. I've lived that life. But also, there's this other thing that you can reimagine for yourself. You don't have to do things the way that you've been taught to do your entire life. You don't have to crave and work towards things that somebody else told you was important. You actually get to decide that for yourself. And so I actually feel really lucky that I spent so much time in corporate, and I'm now stepping outside of that world because I feel like I can bring some people with me.
right. No, I agree. So one thing that I want to ask is community is clearly central to both your poetry and your work with Decca. Um, how have collaborations, poetry readings, or workshops influenced your artistic practice?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. First of all, DECA stands for Discerning Eye Community Agriculture. I'm actually the volunteer organizational director of that, and essentially our goal is to create true food access. So not just like, oh, here's a meal that you have to come to us for every time you need it, but how do we increase the access to fresh produce, and just like other value added products that not only give you the nutrients that you need, but we are presenting it in a way that you actually know what to do with it and can actually enjoy eating it. And also, even if you don't have a home, you can still have things that help you survive and be nourished. But then, even beyond that, how to grow your own food if that's what you want to do, how to make money in your food related business. There's a whole different like branches of what we do, but everything that we do is tied around community because community is resilience. So, like we were kind of talking earlier about how there's a place for everybody and everybody has a different pathway, but if we're all heading in the same direction, we're going to be so much better off and we can do a lot more. So nothing that we do, nothing that I do is outside of the context of community. If it doesn't reinforce community, then I don't do it. Um, and so for me, poetry is spoken word in particular, one of those ways that I bring the right people to me, right? The way that I share my stories and share my vision for what can be, the people that resonate with that come talk to me, and then I go, "Hey, great! Now we can actually be community together, and here are all the different ways we can do that." And also, with like the meditation and like interdependence guide stuff that I do, that's all centered around how do we connect the parts of ourselves and integrate them into one being, but then also understanding how the way that we show up impacts how everybody else around us can show up, and how we influence each other, but are also still very separate. So my poetry just speaks to that in a way that, again, bypasses people's logical brain so that they can really tap into the calling that most people have for community, because we don't live in a society that makes that a very easy task. So anything we can do to make connection and community easier, I'm in.
No, and I definitely agree. And that's what I know I kind of asked this earlier, but one of the questions I have is how do you handle feedback and critique both in poetry? And I know, like I said, I asked this earlier, but how do you handle it in both poetry and activism? And how does it shape your growth as an artist?
I think with activism, it's very similar to how I approach receiving critique and feedback in my poetry, in the sense of, really taking a step back and kind of reading between the lines of what is the important part that this person is trying to get at. So even if they're not saying it in the right way, like there might still be some truth in there that I can transform and alchemize into something that's useful to me. But it's specifically when it comes to activism, I think taking in the consideration of a lot of different viewpoints is really important. Because even if I don't act on somebody's exact advice or, really respond directly to their needs, I can still and should still take those perspectives into consideration. Because if I'm trying to build a system that works for everybody, I even have to include the people that maybe I don't necessarily agree with.
No, and that's one thing that I wanted to ask you about, especially, not everybody agrees with, you know, trying to say how I can word this because like when it comes to DECA, and I know I'm not maybe not saying it right, but
No, you're good.
their farm work is that is what I feel is next level. That's one way of for us to be able to come together and not have to argue about, figure out ways why we're divided or any way like that. Is just one way we can come together. And I'm really that's one thing that I've really been more into, even with contexts that I have here around the local area, is how do we grow and show people how we don't need the government so much. We can do it
Yes.
ourselves when it comes to like,
Mhm.
our food and our housing and just being self-sufficient. So
Mhm.
I it's how has that um like that journey been of like, because I know everybody, I'm not even gonna say critiquing because it's to me, it's like everybody is so opinionated. Um,
Here's the thing, everybody needs to eat. And especially with the government things happening currently, right? That's going to get harder for people. And instead of like blaming them and be like, well, you voted for it, it's like, no, you're hungry. So this is my opportunity to create a system that you don't even see as a system, because the best systems you don't see, to say the most effective systems you don't see. So how do I create a system that just feels so natural to people that they're like, oh, this is how we get food now? And then suddenly we're on the same page about something, and then that becomes an opportunity for true connection. And connection is how we dissipate fear. Connection is how we dissipate scarcity mindsets, and all of these things contribute to reinforcing the old systems that are failing us. So I think for me it's about focusing on, it's being solutions oriented, if I can use my corporate talk, right? uh, how do we solve the problem? Because if we solve the problem, then the thing that reinforces the problem goes away.
right. No, and I definitely agree. Um, so the last question I have is, with the release of Something Softer Than Saturn, both as a book and an album, what do you hope listeners and readers take away from this project, and what's next for you?
I hope that when people are either reading or listening, they understand that there is space for all of them. They don't have to cut themselves up into pieces, that they can show up as they are, and how they are is helpful to us all getting what we need. And I think the more that we swallow parts of ourselves, the more we swallow the potential to take care of each other and take care of ourselves. And so in this experience, I really just hope people are reflecting on their own personal experiences and understanding how holding themselves back holds us all back. As far as what's next for me, I'm having a lot of fun collaborating in many different ways and spaces and with many different people. And I'm also really looking to bring an intimacy to spoken word, and also just the meditation and guidance work that I do, helping people figure out for themselves how to be in community and be okay with messiness, because community is messiness. If it's not messy, then it's a cult.
Right. No, I definitely agree on that. Like, it's so hard for you know us as a community to come together, and it's if it's not messy, I feel like it's not really a community, because that's
Exactly.
how we grew up, is it being messy. You know what I'm saying? It's like, most people, especially, I'm 47, you know what I'm saying? So I know growing up and how I seen it as, a community and as family, it was really messy because, the neighborhood grandma had my neighborhood grandma, I had my neighborhood auntie, and, just cousins and all that. And so,
Hmm.
but we were all together, you know what I mean? Even though it was messy, it was, we all loved each other and looked out for each other. So I totally understand what you're saying of that. It's when we see that community, it doesn't mean that it's organized and strategized, but also that we know that it's messy. No, as much as we want it to be organized and strategized, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and it's like there's possible to be strategy and being organized, but I think really what I'm like trying to say, and like I hear you, and I agree with you that it doesn't have to be organized and strategized. It can be organic. In fact, being organic is a different form of strategy, but probably a more resilient strategy. But anyways, um, I think too, it's just understanding that we're all human, and we're humans, like as consistent as we can be. We are not gonna show up the same way every time. And the more that we can actually see each other in any given moment, and it and be secure in like we have each other's back, and we're not gonna like abandon each other even when maybe somebody's having a hard time, um, it doesn't reinforce the same wounds that we, have accumulated over our lifetime. In being safe in community is not it isn't being unchallenged. It's knowing that whatever happens, we're on the same page of working through it.
No, and I definitely agree. And thank you so much for being on here with me tonight. I know it's
My pleasure.
tonight was the premiere of Revolutionary and Neighborhood Voices, and I want to bring this worldwide. And I want to give you a couple minutes before we get up out of here. I'm gonna play I Hate the World, Demisexual. Before we get up out of here as well, I'm gonna end it with that. But I want to give you a couple minutes to talk to the audience, talk to the chat, and tell them who you are and what you have next, and just everything that about Coral. So there you are with Coral, right?
Everything about Coral, that would take a whole nother podcast. But no, my name is Coral Rites, and that is with an R, like a rite of passage, because I write passages to find pathways to rewrite pathways until we open our third eyes and finally realize we all have divinity inside. And you can find me on Instagram at Coral_Rites, again with an R, like a rite of passage. And I am grateful for anyone who has checked in today and listened to me talk about my composting worms. That's all I got in me, but I appreciate everyone. And thank you for bringing me on today. It was a joy speaking with you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I enjoyed it. And with that being said, we're going to play I Hate the Word.
I Hate the Word, Demisexual. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And with that being said, we're up out of here, and we'll be back tomorrow night. And with a new guest coming on tomorrow will be Lee Moore, and you find out all about Lee. So Eric Lee Moore, Morrow is his name, Junior. So with that being said, we'll be back tomorrow night.
Everybody's best friend. And I can be yours. You can be my romantic partner, but just so you know, so are all my friends. Oh, perhaps you were looking for more? Well, the depth of our emotional penetration is based on the depth you're willing to open. How much are you willing to let me witness? How much of me are you able to handle? How much of you will you let me please? How much of me will you be willing to tease? Play with me, drip heat on me from your candle. If you can't hold a candle to my heart energy, my heart energy, my heart energy, heart. You don't get to use me like a mic and rock me like a vandal. I don't need you to touch me cleverly, but I do need you to massage my heart expertly. Know where to place pressure and where to allow for release. Make me sweat like I'm risking everything, placing a bet, going all in. It's emotional double jeopardy. Fragile, I won't break. It's okay if it stings. Tell me what is real. Ground me into my body, into this reality. I will not waste this opportunity to feed you my yin. Can you see me? How I'm bent but not broken? How I take in your words and hear the ones felt but never spoken? The depth of our emotional penetration is based on the depth you're willing to open. How much are you willing to let me witness? How much of me are you able to handle? Do you have a handle on the nature of change? Can you handle if my yang slips into the conversation? Can you handle if I reveal you to yourself without intimidation? Do you understand the law of equivalent exchange? We can't create something from nothing. Sometimes in order to build, you must dismantle. Dig deep into the earth to create the channel. Channel the waters that grooves flood with wetness. Build up the soil until it's lush and substantial. Before we plant seeds, we must pass this litmus, this
connection has to be a direct so, no indirectness. Oh, indirectness. Oh, indirectness. Oh, indirectness. Oh, indirectness. Oh, I can be your best friend, and I can't pretend I'm not a fountain of romantic emotion. Motion from the many loves I have chosen. But I can promise the depth of our emotional penetration is based on the depth you're willing to open. So, if you're still looking for more, So, if you're still looking for more,
Still looking for more. Still looking for more.
So, if you're still looking for more, then you should know I am open to explore.